Greetings, brothers and sisters. Things have gone, there's just, I was talking to my wife about this morning, and I forgot something from my long video on Afghanistan, a really important point, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But, there's this, you can feel it pervading all of America. Like there's things that bother people in the so-called truth community. And there's things that bother people in like the left-leaning people or the right-leaning people, right? There are things that upset one contingent, one demographic or another. But then there are these events that affect everybody in the country in some degree or another. And you can feel it. Like you can feel the whole, like what happened 20 years ago in 2001, the big event, which is, this is a part of that. And America losing, this is the side, let's just watch this little clip here. These guys climbing up, this is the sign of America losing, right? All these people that have, sold out to the great Satan, which is, an accurate description from their point of view, right? Like all these people who have, thought that America was going to be there for them, just like all of America thinks America's going to be there for them. The flim-flam man aspect of, this life here, these of, the American culture. And, this is what's happening after America bails and loses and quits and is leaving. And I'll talk about America losing because this is like a known entity now, right? That's the point I left out in my video yesterday. America is no longer, like, look at all these people. These people are all flipping out because if they stay, they're dead, right? Here are the headlines: complete failure, 20-year nation building collapses in days. And this is a known thing. It's a known thing that nation building does not work, has never worked. Give me an example of a place where nation building. We'll come back to that. Let me get to the headlines here. I got some stuff on Nancy Pelosi and Liz Cheney to get to after this introduction. Game over. Westerners rush to leave Kabul. Rescue Afghans. And then there's just, the government has collapsed. Video shows Taliban celebrating inside presidential palace because nation building doesn't work, right? It took absolutely no time at all from the point where America was withdrawing to the point where these guys took over the palace, the presidential palace. Was like literally like no time passed, no resistance. It's like passing through a sieve. White House weighs responses. Biden faces mounting criticism over Afghanistan crisis. So, like this guy, right? And he's hiding out. They're all hiding out. Jen Psaki is hiding. This is what they do with JoJo. They hide him when there's controversy. He's not up for it. He can't answer tough questions. He should be in front of the American people. He's been in politics 47 years, and he was behind these failed policies, right? Might as well listen to this a little bit here. This is kind of a big moment, where the news media is looking for this guy for leadership after they hit him for years, right? They hit him through the whole presidential primary and the election, covered up for him. And this guy's not up to the task. His presidency is similar to the Afghanistan presidency, and I'll get into that.
Biden this morning facing a catastrophic failure of U.S. foreign policy. Our only glimpse of the president in the last 24 hours, this White House photo showing him seated alone at Camp David, consulting by video conference with national security advisors.
Like how sad, right? He's on a Zoom call. He's getting rolled up here. Just brutal. He looks like a sad old man sitting in a room by himself while he's on vacation. You can't be on vacation. You need to be out there, Ebenezer, right? The sheeple are upset. This is something where the sheeple now are flipped out. What was that all for kind of moment?
including Vice President Kamala Harris. Despite the president's promise that the withdrawal of American troops would be responsible, deliberate, and safe, the Biden administration is now trying to explain why the U.S. was so caught off guard by the stunning speed of the Taliban takeover, pointing to the collapse of Afghan security forces.
Dude's wearing a mask.
Unfortunately, tragically, they have not been able to defend the country, and I think that explains why this has moved as quickly as it's moved.
That acknowledgement coming despite the U.S. spending $87 billion over 20 years to train Afghan military forces.
What's $87 billion amongst friends?
This morning, the chorus of criticism is growing.
This is going to be a stain on this president and his presidency, and I think he's going to have blood on his hands for what they did.
Blood on his hands.
Even the president's allies demanding answers.
This is an intelligence failure. We underestimated the Taliban and overestimated the resolve of the Afghan.
I covered this in a video yesterday. There was an expert on CNN. He said, which I knew, because I was seeing what's going on, and the American military knew, and everybody knew, like all these people, she knew. I mean, anybody who's, in the know knew that the troops they were training were more likely to shoot Americans than shoot Taliban, right? like when they went on a joint mission, Joe Biden himself said in a presidential debate, I covered this again, my long video yesterday, Joe Biden himself said that there was blue on green shootings, 24 of them, 24 of them, and if they kept on shooting Americans, they were just going to train them in the green zone. They weren't going to train them. They weren't going to train them in joint missions together because they were shooting at Americans too much, right? With American weapons. And so we knew this. We knew this years ago, that they had no resolve. And there's a reason for this. It's what I forgot to talk about yesterday. We're going to go through this and I'll talk about it.
Army.
President Biden in a statement this weekend writing 1 more year or 5 more years of U.S. military presence would not have made a difference if the Afghan military cannot or will not hold it.
And 20 years didn't make a difference, right? This is a fail. This is America losing. This is what it looks like when America loses a war. We didn't lose in the sense of the oppositional military beat our military, right? And I would say our, but American military. There's no army on earth that can stand up to the American military, but the way that you win is you just outlast them, right? You just take all the shots, you take all the whatever, and you just outlast them. That's what the Vietnamese did. If it isn't a guy, they can go get rid of Gaddafi, they can get rid of Saddam Hussein, and it looks like, we got that guy, right? We got him, we did what we did, right? We got him, right? That's what, Americans can claim victory. But it's when it's the Taliban, when it's the North Viet Cong, it isn't a dude, it isn't a person. It's it's an ideology. They just get outlasted. Just like this guy, there's no enthusiasm behind him. There's no Joe Biden lovers, right? There's no Joe Biden fans. And so, I'll come back to all that because it's important.
Its own country. Still, he's likely to be haunted by these comments from last month.
But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
So they're crapping on him. This is MSNBC that has hid Joe Biden away and given him 100% coverage, but now he owns this. He's the face of Afghanistan collapse. And wrongfully now, but rightfully for his 47, 48 years in helping to create these policies and what he did as vice president and what he did as senator voting for these wars and what he did as, a person all along in his life. He's totally responsible, as are so many other people, but he's the face of this collapse.
Even before the catastrophic collapse, defense officials worried a Taliban takeover could allow al-Qaeda to rebuild and consolidate, creating security concerns well beyond the Afghan border. For those who served and sacrificed in America's longest war, like retired Army Staff Sergeant Seamus Fennessy, anger and sadness.
It feels like not only a betrayal of what our soldiers have bled for, the way.
See, this is where the sheeple are like, wait, you promised us this thing. You said this is what was going to happen. It didn't. And it makes it harder and harder, probably impossible now, to launch more of these wars, these ridiculous wars that none of them delivered what they were promising. And I'll get back to that. The New York Post is all over this. Afghan desperation, civilians cling to Air Force plane as it takes off in Kabul, people seen falling to their deaths. Well, that's not funny. But the plain thing is, 2 decades wasted travesty in Afghanistan leaves us where we were 20 years ago, and that's what makes people bummed. $1 trillion and lives lost for what? Like this is, a for what moment. No one cares about us, Afghan girl cries in emotional video, man. Among Taliban brutality, Trump calls on Biden to resign in disgrace over crisis in Afghanistan, and they're hiding JoJo away. Like this is what he's going to do. Infuriating and predictable Joe Biden defeat will echo for eternity. It's that he's hiding away because he can't deal with this. He's, he doesn't have the capacity to go out and answer tough questions. He'll get angry. And porn star legend of the 80s and 90s dead at 60. This is what's great about the New York Post, right? They, Deborah Winger quit A League of Their Own because of Madonna casting. Well, let the punishment fit the crime. U.S. military struggles to manage evacuation as Taliban topples Afghan government. So I wanted to get to the Liz Cheney quote and Nancy Pelosi just too clueless, and I want to mock that for a while because it's worth mocking. But I, wanted to do this introductory piece. So the part that I left out yesterday was that when you try to impose a government, when you try to nation build, it doesn't work. The UN hasn't been able to do it, and America hasn't been able to do it. So when America goes in and does regime change wars, and we've done them, and it doesn't have to be wars, there's a book out there, How America Kills Countries, and there's videos, I think, still out there about how the CIA kills countries, and this is a CIA operation, and we know it doesn't work. We know not only does it not work, but it makes things worse and worse for America. So they did this 60 years ago in Iran called Operation Ajax, which I've covered often here. I've talked about. They had a democratically elected leader, Mossadegh. Iran was a modernized country. It was, he was a moderate leader, but BP, which was the company that started the oil industry in Iran, wanted 80% of the profits, and Mossadegh said, no, we're only going to give you 50%. We'll split it, and BP got the CIA, BP, British Petroleum, got the CIA to try to get rid of the guy, and they eventually got rid of him. They tried multiple tactics, and they installed the Shah of Iran. I just watched that movie Argo. That's why I made that joke yesterday. Like the end of the movie. And, it's actually a kind of good movie, and but it doesn't give you the full details of what happened in terms of the great Satan, right? America went in and took out a good leader, destroyed the country by installing a bloodthirsty, greedy piece of crap as known as the Shah of Iran. And he, fled the country just like this is happening now because the people of Iran got mad because America was imposing a government on them that wasn't coming from them and their will, right? From their, from their internal process, what they wanted from a leader. There was no enthusiasm there. It was a puppet leader. When you install a puppet, we know what happens. And now Iran is a big problem for America and, the Middle East and all of them. And it's regressive. And it's been taken over by fundamentalists. And it came in a wave of anger, just like you see going on in Afghanistan. Because when you put in a puppet leadership, just like, the leader of Afghanistan fleeing the country, the leader of Afghanistan is very much like Joe Biden. Joe Biden there was no enthusiasm behind his presidency. There was like Bernie Sanders, he had enthusiasm. Trump had enthusiasm. Trump had, fans, actual people that loved him, right? And I'm not saying Trump is great or Bernie Sanders is great, but there's an actual, there's energy and there's American will and people who are motivated by a candidate, by a movement, emotionally, on a deeper level. And Joe Biden got in on Trump hatred and the media hiding him away and, more money and whatever else went on to get him in as president. And there's no Joe Biden fans. There's no one that has Joe Biden's back, right? Like, he's a decent guy. That's what he's decent. Yeah, he's pretty decent, that guy. That's what they were saying, Michelle Obama and other people. Joe's decent. Like, that was the talking point. Like, Trump sucks and Joe's at least decent. And so Joe Biden is the, JoJo Maghoul is like the president of Afghanistan. And the Afghanistan army, when America invaded Afghanistan, there wasn't a resistance to the Taliban. There wasn't people working to overthrow the Taliban in any real way. People not liking them, sure. People wishing that they would go away, sure. But the Afghan people weren't, rising up against the Taliban. There was no, people who were challenging the Taliban in any realistic way. And so America came in, and America has a better military, more organized, and they were able to, beat the Taliban down, make them retreat, gain hold of these cities because of our, military presence, costing us a fortune, America, but we couldn't hold the country, right? America couldn't go in there and just take over the country and, make it an extension, make it another state of the American government and keep a huge military base over there with, hundreds of thousands of troops or something and fight constant war, because that's not, the world wouldn't stand for it, and it wasn't, something America was going to do, right? Could do. And so they trained an army that wasn't, these guys weren't wanting to fight the Taliban. They didn't come in wanting to fight the Taliban. They came in for a job or whatever reason they had, and they didn't even like the Americans, right? Same thing with the South Vietnamese, right? There's the North Vietnamese that they were communists, and they had emotion. They had, they had like a movement, like there was a legitimate internal movement. And the South Vietnamese were being propped up by Americans' will, right? By the will of America. My brother said he was there for a speech by the leader of the South Vietnamese, our allies. And he asked the translator what he was saying. The guy said, the Americans are here. We don't really like them either, but, we got to take their money and do it, so there was no sense of, we want to be what America wants us to be in all these countries. It's arrogant, right? That America would try to impose what they think the government of these countries would be, right? Even if there is resistance, America doesn't help by being a part of that resistance. The people in these countries don't want a foreign power. Like, think about if China took over America or Russia took over America, installed puppet leaders, right? And said, this is what we want your government to be. We want your government to be a communist government. And they put in a communist government. Think about how you would feel. And, if the soldiers were on the street and you couldn't do anything about it, right? You couldn't do shit about it. You're, being completely oppressed. You would hate those countries. You would really hate them the way that these countries hate America, right? My wife said the great Satan. I was like, yeah, this is, they're right to think of America as the great Satan. America went in after the big event in 2001, and they went in and took over Afghanistan and, spent $1 trillion and lost American lives. And now they screwed over all these people, gave them false hope, put in a puppet leader. America was bringing leaders that were exiled, in Iraq, and they were, they put in these guys that nobody wanted. And they said, all right, this is the guy we want, but to the people of Afghanistan, were they willing to fight for that government or any of those things? They constructed a government, and when you impose something from the outside, right, it always, this is what the heartfulness system does. It changes people on the inside, on a soul level, in a way that your soul wants you to change, in a way that your soul is behind. And so when everything has to come from within. within a person and within a country itself, within a town itself, right? I mean, think about all the local governments and states that are pissed that the national government have enforced a lot of these like COVID rules or whatever it is, small businesses, right? Like, people don't like it. There's, a will of, insurrection. There's a will of like, people wanting to overturn the federal government from being oppressed, even in our own country. And America went into all of these various countries. They went into, Libya, for example, got rid of the leadership there. Now that country is a mess. The people are like, they're hating America there, right? And then, of course, Iraq. I mean, that's a mess, right? And, it's going to, continuously be more and more of a mess because you can't go in and remove a government and then install something else and expect it to stick, right? It has to come from within. It has to come in an organic way from the people themselves. Nation building is a failure, and they know it's a failure. They've been doing it for years. They have been taking out leaders. They have been taking out governments. They've been rigging elections, America, in these various countries, and it doesn't work. It's a known entity. They know it doesn't last. It doesn't stick. And what it ends up being, the great Satan. It creates hate from these countries and these people. The arrogance of the American government to try to say, all right, this is what we think your government should be. This is what we think you should do. Like, not we think, this is what we're forcing upon you, right? We're an evil empire. When I realized America was like an evil empire, I was like, oh, that sucks, right? Like, it doesn't feel good. Like, your programming, your upbringing, the things that you've been told your whole life about what America is, right? And we're just out there for freedom. No, we're going to other countries and we're imposing our will upon the people there, and they don't like it. As soon as we leave, right, then they're going to go back to, it's going to get worse there because now they're angry, and then all the radicals in that country start to gain, this is what's happening with the Joe Biden presidency. All the, radicals on the right are gaining power because people are getting more and more pissed off because this leader who's not a leader, this career politician who was always less, an extra in a movie, never a star. Joe Biden wasn't a star, right? Obama was a star. Joe Biden isn't a star, right? Even, George W. Bush was a star. Like people, Bernie Sanders is a star, not a star like you think about, not maybe for you, but for some people. Joe Biden doesn't have a movement behind him. There's no, Joe Biden movement. He couldn't get people to come and see him at his rallies, right? And so when you impose somebody that is against the will of the people, then people get pissed off, right? And the radicals gain strength and they get even more radical, and there's anger, and then that anger spills out in hatred and division in a country, right? And that's what's happened to America, is just a reflection of this is the fall of America. These wars don't work. They don't work because you're imposing them from the outside. If you want to change somebody, you have to change them on the inside, and people have to change themselves. They have to want to change. Like working as a counselor and, doing the heartfulness meditation and seeing other people do it. If people don't want to change, there's nothing you can do, right? You can't make other people change. You can change yourself. That's about it, right? And you can be a good example or influence on people. But the people who want to change, they'll do well, right? If you have a system, the heartfulness system helps people change internally. Even therapy works, to some extent, if people are really willing to change, right? You have to have these people who are desperate to change. When people reach this level where they're desperate to change, will do anything, right? When people reach this level where all right, I got to change. It's just, you realize you have to change. Other than that, like people will, see alcoholics consistently throw their life away, throw everything good in their life away for alcohol or drug addiction or gambling addiction or whatever it is, right? Narcissism. People lose everything good in their life because they refuse. The information is coming back to them. The feedback is coming back to them. And on a soul level, they want to change, right? On a soul level, they want to change. But they just can't, whatever has got a hold on them, their egos or their, addiction or whatever is more powerful than their desire to have good things and move along forward and, connect to God and, have loving relationships and things. I mean, most people are in miserable situations and are just accepting of them. And most of them are scared to have a good life, are scared to, have positive relationships, to be, connected to God. Most people are scared of God. And most people are just, they're used to their miserable circumstances and their, lower level of consciousness and vibrations and are scared to rise up to a higher level. That's why there's very few saints, very few highly developed spiritual beings. That's why humanity gets bogged down. People don't feel comfortable reaching up and changing and being better themselves. And so they, accept whatever. People in masses will take the government that is a reflection of what they're used to, right? That's why there's all these corrupt governments around the world and our corrupt government. It's just that our government goes out and grabs other people's resources and provides a lifestyle for us here because of the structure of the world economy, the value of the dollar, and our military, that we can have a lifestyle that makes us think that somehow we deserve, we're better than other countries and we're, whatever it is, right? And so, that works for Americans, but it doesn't work for the people in other countries. We go and try to impose our will on them and say, this is what we need you to be. We need you to accept the leader that we force feed on you, our puppet leader. And the people don't like it, right? The great Satan. And that's, why there's all this anger and animosity towards Americans. And it'll, it's going to be getting worse, right? The people in Afghanistan, the ones that thought America was there and was going to stand by them, the people who are enjoying America being in Afghanistan are fleeing and running, and look at what's happening there. And so we know this doesn't work. There's no example of nation building out there that works, right? Where a country or the UN, America or the UN or whatever it is, European countries, impose a government. I mean, it happened when the British, this is something that the British found out. The Queen found out, right? When they, they went into all these countries and imposed their will. And as soon as they left, like in India and all these countries, the people went back to something completely different. External force always creates a counter force. That's why the heartfulness system, the transmission that's given is the forceless force. It doesn't create an oppositional force within the people when you receive the transmission. It's love, right? It's the most subtle energy. It's God, the most subtle energy that is, pervades the universe. And so it doesn't create a counter force because, it's something that you absorb, something that you feed off of, something that your soul wants, right? And so there's no rebound, there's no pushback. And so America lost this war. And let me just, I want to get into the Nancy Pelosi thing and then also the Liz Cheney thing. And let's first go to Chris Cuomo's. A couple of my viewers sent me this morning. So this is going around the internet. Chris Cuomo, I knew he would dance like this, right? Like, as soon as I saw him dancing, I'm like, that's exactly how Chris Cuomo would dance, right? Like, just stiff and just ridiculous, right? And, as his brother is being, he's in some sort of like seedy, looks like, almost like I don't know what it is, but let's watch it again here. Now that everybody has a movie camera in their phone, you can't do stuff like that, right? Where's he dancing? Like he's at his table. He's not on the dance floor. Chris Cuomo's cutting loose. Anyways, all right, let's go to... So I saw this last night, blood on his hands. Last night the article said, Liz Cheney says Biden has blood on his hands, which I guess maybe they were lying because I couldn't find the quote anywhere. Now they've changed it to... Now it says, Republicans say there's blood on his hands. Okay, this somber, ghoulish-looking MNFer is Liz Cheney. And so she's on This Week with ABC News talking about the mess her father was the architect of creating.
Congresswoman Cheney, when you look at this effort, nearly 20 years of a U.S. military presence in Afghanistan, $83 billion spent to train and equip the Afghan security forces. Why has this been such a colossal failure?
Well, I think if you look at where we were, if you look at what it would have taken in terms of maintaining the status quo, 2,500 to 3,500 forces on the ground.
This is a Republican talking point that they could have left some Trumps. Some troops. They could have left some Trumps or troops in there. Maybe they could clone a bunch of Donald Trumps and put them in there. They could have left some troops in there. There's that guy, Dan Crenshaw, who is a complete nightmare. I know there's people on the right wing that are loving Dan Crenshaw, but he's completely dishonest about... all this stuff was fake, right? All the stuff that got us into this mess is, an illusion, right? All the events, all the things that made these wars happen. We were lied to on every level. And then people should know that. By her dad, right? And so it isn't the way that the exit was handled. It was the fact that we went to war in these places and engaged in nation building, which I've explained, and most people should understand and know that nation building has never, ever, ever, ever worked.
Around conducting counterterrorism, counterintelligence operations. This disaster, the catastrophe that we're watching unfold right now across Afghanistan did not have to happen. And it's not just that.
It didn't have to happen ever. We should have never been there in the first place. Our country would have collapsed economically had we not engaged in these wars. So it isn't like we have a system that's not sustainable. And the only way it's sustainable is this type of behavior, these type of wars, right? But these wars don't work. Nation-building wars, colonialism doesn't work anymore. It works for people like her dad who orchestrated, who was the architect of these wars, right? Who was a big part of it. If her dad wasn't vice president, they wouldn't have been able to pull this stuff off. If he wasn't pulling the puppet strings of George W. Bush, right? They wouldn't have been able to. Her dad's worth $90 million or something. He was the president. He worked for George Bush Sr. as the defense secretary. And Rumsfeld was, the Secretary of State, and they worked together. Her dad and Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney and Dick Rumsfeld, and they worked together. And then Dick Cheney went to work for Halliburton, which is a military-industrial complex company that is responsible for rebuilding countries and things like this. They do war services. You got a lot of these companies that when America goes to war, they come in and they provide services and they make a lot of taxpayer money. They get overpaid, they overcharge. And he orchestrated this war, and then his former company, got all these wonderful contracts in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they paid him off, right? He's got, he's worth like $90 million. And he had, just a public, the vice president makes what, $200,000, $300,000 a year or something. And, he could never amass that much wealth from his work in politics. And so there's people who got paid because of these wars. And her dad and her family are one of them, right? And she's a lifeless. I never heard her speak before, but she's so ghoulish.
That people predicted that this would happen. Everyone was warned that this would happen.
Before we went in, we knew this would happen, right?
Now created a situation where, as we get to the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we are surrendering Afghanistan to the terrorist organization that housed Al-Qaeda when they plotted and planned the attacks against us. It's inexcusable. It's devastating. And
it's the same old rhetoric from her father's rhetoric. And it's, people are digging Liz Cheney. Her father wasn't someone with charisma. He got power in a state that doesn't have a big population, Wyoming. And they've become, power brokers there. But she's some lifeless ghoul. I've never heard her talk before, really. But she's just got that lifeless, ghoulish energy. Her dad has that heart problem. Remember, he has a like a fake heart in there, and he was doing an interview, and he took out the battery of his fake heart, like he was like playing chicken with the reporter. So I couldn't find the interview I was thinking of. We'll just watch this here. But Dick Cheney had 5 heart attacks, right? And that speaks to his etheric heart.
I wear a vest all the time. And
so which is the battery? Is that part? That's the battery.
Well, I got 2 batteries here. Here's one. I've got another one just like this.
This is his heart mate, right? There's his battery.
Comes apart, and it'll bleep in a moment.
And that means you better put it back in.
That means that you're disconnected.
And that lasts for how long?
Well, several hours.
And then you have a spare. And the other side is the spare?
I carry. Well, they're...
So he has this heart mate. In the video that I saw, the interview, I think he was sitting with his wife and a female reporter, might have been Diane Sawyer or somebody, I'm not sure. And he took out the battery and it was beeping, and he was pretending to play chicken. Like he was teasing his the interviewer and maybe his wife to some extent. Like he wasn't going to put the battery back in. Like he got like goofy about it. And I remember people saying, you know, and thinking maybe possibly myself, don't put it back, right? Like he's playing chicken, like, you know, he's such an evil person. 5 heart attacks, right? And he was the architect of all these horrible wars and, you know, all the manipulation he did and, you know, the people that, I mean, again, he has handlers and, you know, he was doing the bidding of whatever. But the stuff that he did in Afghanistan and the catalyst to Afghanistan and his puppeting and handling of George W. Bush was the reason why we are where we are now. They were mistakes, things that should have never happened. We had no right to be over in Afghanistan, had nothing to do with us. It was all, you know, it was built on a sea of lies. And this is his ghoulish offspring.
And it is going to have ramifications not just for Afghanistan, not just for us in Afghanistan, not just for the war on terror, but globally for America's role in the world, the extent to which America's adversaries know they can threaten us, and our allies are questioning this morning whether they can count on us for anything.
Now, ultimately, this is President Biden's decision. He is the one
Where do you think he's going to go with this?
that is called for this withdrawal, is going forward with it. But this didn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, It was President Trump that negotiated the agreement with the Taliban to have a complete...
It's Trump's fault, right?
Withdrawal that was supposed to actually happen by May 1st. So who bears responsibility?
Look, I think absolutely President Biden bears responsibility for making this decision. But there is no question that President Trump, his administration, Secretary Pompeo, they also bear very...
Come on. Like, Trump is the least responsible of all the presidents. He wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but didn't because of his own weakness, because he knew he was going to be what Biden is taking on right now is what Trump would have had to bear, right? Because this is what would have happened under any president. As soon as they withdrew from this mistake, it's a mistake. And so, you know, now Americans are realizing it's a mistake, and so they're blaming Biden. Biden now, JoJo Maghoul, right? But they should have blamed Biden and Liz Cheney's dad and, you know, all these other people for getting into these wars in the first place. You know, Biden's responsible because he's been a part of the government and pushing these policies, and he never once spoke up against them, right? But it was a mistake in the beginning, right? It was going into these wars. It wasn't the way these wars were handled. It was doing something that it's been shown over and over again doesn't work. America imposing its will on other people and other governments, and nation building, which brings us to Nancy. This is Nancy Pelosi, Fire Marshal Shill, the original Fire Marshal Shill. I've shown that picture before. And Nancy's crazy. One of my viewers sent me this on Instagram last night. Nancy's just, you know, much farther gone than even JoJo Maghoul. She's older and just, but this is her ridiculous statement. The president is to be commended for the clarity of purpose of his statement. His ridiculous statement is just words. It rings hollow. his statement on Afghanistan and his action. The Taliban must know the world is watching its actions. We are concerned about the reports regarding the Taliban's brutal treatment of all Afghans, especially women and girls. This part right here, the Taliban must know the world is watching its actions. It's just it's just like when JoJo Maghoul made a threat to the Taliban in his statement, and it's just, ridiculous, right? See, let's get clear about what happened. America got its ass kicked by Afghanistan. Like, this is what's happened. Not in the traditional sense, but in every sense we've lost, or America has lost, this war. And it was going to lose this war because part of the victory, part of what would be considered victorious, was to get rid of the Taliban and have a different government, a government that was more favorable and more in line with American policies, right? Because their stated goal was to prevent it being a harbor for, dudes like bin Laden, right? They were saying that it was a safe harbor for bin Laden and groups like Al-Qaeda, and that we had to go in there and make sure that this wasn't a safe harbor for these things, right? And so that was the official, reason, which was, BS in the first place. So if you don't achieve your objectives, and, the whole objective was to get rid of the Taliban, which is now emboldened. They have American weapons. They have American training, right? Like, Taliban is way stronger now, has been strengthened by this war. American money has gone into propping up the Taliban. So the exact opposite of what they said they wanted to do has been achieved. And that was going to happen no matter what. That was going to happen as soon as we embarked on these BS wars, these bullshit wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Libya and all these places, right? The whole Arab Spring. None of those things were going to yield results. You have broken countries that are way worse off. The people are worse off. Millions of people were basically murdered by the American government in terms of these wars. Civilians, kids, all these things, right? And then suffering. The suffering is even a bigger problem. The deaths are deaths, right? But suffering, that's long lasting. They've created, chaos and bad governments and thug rule in all these countries, like, right, the great Satan, like I was saying before. And the book is out on how you beat America, how you beat a strong military. It's like when you have a football team that comes in with like the West Coast offense or the triangle offense in NBA basketball, right? They come up with, some coach comes up with some offense or something, right? Some kind of game plan, and it works. It's great in the beginning, but other coaches find flaws in the system and exploit it, and then the system is, modified and it's not as dominant as it once was. You see this happen all the time. And the way that you beat America, it's been clear since Vietnam, is that you fade into the community. You don't have an army against an army. You have people who aren't, dressed as an army. They're dressed as civilians, and they're a part of the civilian community. And it makes you have to go in there and, go through civilian villages, civilian people, and, basically go door to door and beat them up and harass them to figure out if they're actually a part of the secret military that's there. And that doesn't go well. The soldiers aren't into it, right? The American soldiers are traumatized by this because they're basically going to ordinary people's houses and kicking down the doors and doing all these things, right? It's there's these memes, knock, knock, it's democracy, and these soldiers are kicking down the door, right? I got a couple of these memes from the war. And so, they never end up getting and finding all the hidden military that's fighting an insurgent war. And it just bleeds the big country dry, all the mobilization costs and all these things that happen with the military. Moving a military from, one part of the world to the other side of the world is difficult. Afghanistan's a hard place to get into, right? It's land blocked, and there's all these countries around it that aren't really cool with you coming in, and airlifting things in is difficult. Just getting the weapons and the soldiers in there is tough. We're not going back, right? They're threatening the Taliban like, we're watching you guys. Yeah. Like, what are you going to do, Nancy? Like, you're going to go back in? You're going to say we go back in? No, we're not going back in to Afghanistan. Afghanistan kicked our ass like it kicked Alexander the Great's ass and Russia, the Soviet Union's ass. I mean, this is what happens when you go in there. It's cursed, right? This is what happens. I mean, there's a couple of things. We knew what was going to happen with nation building. The puppet government was going to collapse because they always do. So that was going to be a failure. And we know from history that great empires have fallen after going into Afghanistan. And we're falling right now. We're collapsing. And this is, this was known. They didn't, bring that out there. And so the Taliban just waited, right? They outweighted us. They couldn't win in a head-on, mano-a-mano, army against army type of situation. But, the recipe for beating America is out there, or beating any kind of a globalist type of army on a local basis. What you do is you fade into the civilian population, and they attack people whenever they can, right? They do little insurgent attacks, just keeping the bleeding dry, the wealth, the treasure of the empire, and they just chip away at it, and eventually the empire quits and leaves because they can't sustain it anymore, right? They have domestic problems, and this went on for 20 years. Eventually, we had to get out of there, right? No matter what these clowns are saying, all these Republicans, we should have left a military force. That guy, Dan Crenshaw, right? In a land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? The Illuminati. Watch out for that MNFer, because they're trying to, they're trying to bring him in and make him into a star. He's still touting the same old, lies about the events that were the excuses, the lies that were sold to the American public, the illusions to create these wars in the first place. And so, but it's all BS, right? And so this is, this is the outcome of all those lies. Eventually, the lies get exposed. And the lies get exposed by promises that are broken, failures of purpose, and America, getting outlasted again, right? You can be in a boxing match, a 20-round boxing match, and the one boxer is a superior boxer and beats the other boxer up for 20 rounds, wins every round, but then gets tired and worn out and just quits, right? Like, let's say, there was no cap limit to the amount of rounds. It was, someone had to be knocked out. And so as long as you're knocked out, like the Taliban were knocked out, it's easy for, an idea not to be knocked out, right? Because you can get rid of some of the leadership, you can get rid of some of their infrastructure and things like this. But if the idea survives, the organization survives, whatever it might be, the Viet Cong or the Taliban or whatever it is in every country, you just outlast the big, heavy power, and, you break them. And people are feeling this, right? America can no longer impose its will. America is a joke, right? Joe Biden's a joke. Nobody likes Joe Biden. Trump was a joke in his way, and he played and manipulated his followers, his voters, and then the QB movement and just the liberal stuff is so all this agenda, the Hollywood morality. I mean, we're collapsing, right? And right on cue, a war with invade Afghanistan right when there's moral decay, right when there's the collapse of the dollar and inflation and this COVID thing and all the debt and all this stuff, like it's a show of the collapse. And so I got a bunch of other like celebrity stuff to will go with this because it's all a part of the same apocalypse, right? I mean, this is the apocalypse which is upon us. And Nancy, Fire Marshal Schill, is out there. Nancy. I was going to do a thing about Paulina Prazakovas and Lizzo. Both of them were flipping out and crying on Instaghoul, which is the new celebrity pastime, to cry about your celebrity life on Instaghoul. But I'll include that in another video. I guess Biden's going to speak today, and I want to cover that, I guess, tomorrow. So I don't know. I'll try to get to those other subjects. But I just wanted to say that, this is validation, not a great validation. The thing in Afghanistan, like so many other things, if they're lying about something, it inevitably has to come out, right? They lied us into these wars, and what they got out of the wars in terms of the military-industrial complex, but also keeping the economy from collapsing. See, they can't tell you the truth, all of us the truth, about these wars because they're evil empire wars, right? We have no business going into somebody else's country and changing their government. And we do it all the time. We put in puppet leaders and then leave the puppet leaders to flee the country because we no longer can sustain any sort of support for them. And they always flee the country because they're just like JoJo Maghoul. They're not the preference of the people. The people just accept them, tolerate the Americans until they leave. If you want support, you got to win people over. You got to win their hearts. And if you lie your way into things like these wars, you manipulate people emotionally, there's going to be problems. I mean, eventually it's going to come around. People are going to be aware of it, enough people. And that's what's happened to America across the board. And so that's why America can no longer be the police force of the world and is collapsing under the weight of all the deception because enough people are waking up to, even if they're waking up to some of it, doesn't have to be, a full-on spiritual, epiphany or something. You just have to kind of understand that you're being lied to. And then you question everything that happens, right? You question the legitimacy of everything they tell you, the media and the government. And now that's, that makes it impossible to get the kind of support George W. Bush got after the big event in 2001. He got, 80% support. But like I said, they need to keep on doing these things to keep the economy going. It's a way of boosting the economy and keep everyone distracted. But, it's only going to last for so long. So I want to cover this more in the video, I guess, when Biden gives his speech. But this is why I contrast these events and what's going on with the controllers and on every level, because it's imposed, forced from the outside in. This is a prime example. This is a superior military force going into a country and saying, this is the kind of government you should have. It's like somebody coming to your house that you don't know and says, all right, what do you do for work? I'm a farmer. Nope, you're going to sell cars, right? I see you're single. No, you're going to marry somebody right now. We're going to bring in your spouse, right? Like, coming in and telling you what to eat and how to whatever it is. Like, we saw this for many people in terms of the, COVID stuff. People went along with it. States went along with it because it was forced upon them by the federal government. But many states were not, on board. They just had to go along with it because, there was a threat of pulling their federal funding and all the rest of these things. And so when you force things, it always backfires. When you force something from the outside, the heartfulness system works from the inside out and works in a way that the soul signs off on it. A person's soul is in agreement with the work that's going on in the heartfulness system, right? And this is, a beautiful aspect to it because it doesn't work by some external imposition of do this, behave like this. It works from the inside out. And that's, the solution to this problem of, imposed will and force and manipulation that's so prevalent with the controlling system. Only spirituality will save this world. It's power motto. Definitely pointing from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.